we're not here to try to offend anybody. We're just trying to state historical facts and that God loves the people in this church too. All right, so we talked about the he in chapter 12, verse 7. Who is this he? So he, in the later part of the sentence, the little horn, which is the bishop of Rome, also known as the Pope, shall accomplish persecuting the saints during this interval of time, and then all things shall be finished, signifying the beginning of the time of the end and the unsealing of Daniel's final prophetic session, where knowledge shall be increased both technologically and biblically. And understand this, you could read the book, but if the Spirit of God isn't revealing it to you, it's just a bunch of words. You'll get some, but you're not going to get the understanding. And it also says that men shall run to and fro, signifying the beginning of the transportation era, which started with steam power, which is the fulfillment of verse 4 of Daniel chapter 12. All right, so now this second reference to this prophetic segment of time in the Bible called times and a half, back in Daniel chapter 7, verses 7 and 8. All right, so in Daniel 7, right, Daniel sees this dreadful and terrible beast which had 10 horns. Amongst a little horn came up, before whom there were 3 plucked up. And then in Daniel 7 again, starting verse 19 of chapter 7, Daniel is given a repeat and enlargement session on this same fourth beast, representing an empire, but now the 10 horns are referred to as 10 kings. It's still the same thing, which came to pass in AD 476 when the division of the Western Roman Empire. And the little horn here is referred to as another instead of in this repeat enlargement, and shall arise and subdue 3 kings instead of 3 horns, 3 kings, in verse 24 of Daniel chapter 7. Now let's read Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, and compare it to our current verse, Daniel 12:7. Now, by the way, this is going to we can't dive into this topic really deep. It wouldn't be beneficial. After a while, it's just too much information to fall out. It's just too much. We're just going to touch the surface as we go, but when you leave, there's a study guide here, and you can, at your own pace, you can dig through these things in depth through this study guide. Make sure that everyone gets one of these on their way out from the deacons, and also those online. You can go to the website under resources, and you can download this also. It's in PDF form. All right, so we're going to go to Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, and we're going to look into this a little bit more deeper before we move on. All right? And Daniel 7:25, and it reads, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High." This is the same he we're talking about, the little horn. "And shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change times and laws, and they shall be given unto his hand until a time and times and dividing of time." So, all right, so here we see the first reference of this period of time. And it's throughout Revelation, but we don't have time to go into this deep. All right, so here's the first reference of this prophetic segment of time. "And the wearing out of the saints did not begin until after the 3 horns or kings were subdued, which was finalized in AD 538, with the Byzantine army defeating the Ostrogoths in Rome." And brethren, there's no reference to any decree in Daniel chapter 7 at all. Right? The Justinian decree was written at or before AD 533, which did, however, give the bishop of Rome the power to persecute or scatter the saints, but the prophetic marker or indicator is the plucking or subduing of the 3rd horn or king. All right, so to put this in perspective, the decree was the bullet placed in the chamber of the gun of the persecution, but the plucking or subduing of the 3rd horn or king is what pulled the trigger. That's what set this this persecution off, and given the time marking of 538. All right, and like I say, this is all done in great depth in this study. We can't do it in this time segment. So go home and you can study with your family, and it will be a good study. All right, so a brief summary of this duration of this prophecy before we move on. The time, remember, time singular, times plural, and half of time recorded in Daniel 12 verse 7 represents what? 1 plus 2 plus half is 3.5 years, which also comes out to 1,260 prophetic days. And with the application of the day for year principle, the 1,260 days equals 1,260 years. And like I say, you can learn more about that in the study. We don't have the time to go off in that direction. All right, next slide. Now you can see a chart up here. And so remember, this time prophecy began at AD 538 when the little horn began to make war with the saints, and 1,260 years later would bring it to the year AD 1798 when French General Berthier captured the Pope during the French Revolution. But this little horn was actually around before AD 538, which we will learn about when we get to verse 11. So remember, AD 538 to AD 1798 concerning Daniel 12 verse 7 as we move on with our study. All right? Now, because this prophecy sets up the time reference for the next prophecy in verse 11 of Daniel chapter 12. All right? Because whenever we see prophecies, there's a time stamp or a reference or something that sets it off. It was the plucking of the third horn, which we found now is 538. But when we go to verses 11 and 12, there's none of those references. The only reference we were given is this 1,260 years, which has already been established with Daniel's vision in chapter 7. All right, but it's very important because this is how we got to be able to move forward with these. All right, so now we're going to verse 8, Daniel chapter 12, verse 8. And it says, "And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" So the first question was posed in verse 6 by one of the two standing on the sides of the river, which was, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And after the reply, which we just read in verse 7, Daniel asked a new question, what shall be the end of these things? So we're going to go to verse 9 and see what happens next. All right, so, and he said, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end." All right? So Daniel is reminded that the words are closed up or shut up, as in verse 4, and also sealed. But the narrative continues, so let's do the same as we go to verse 10. All right? So here we go. "Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand." Very important here. "But who the wise shall understand. So many shall receive the righteousness of Jesus Christ in faith and be made whiter than snow." All right? Then it's stated that the wise shall understand. But understand what? Right? Where is this going? What do we got to understand? In order to find out, we'll go to verses 11 and 12. All right? But before we continue, this is a very controversial topic. The next two time prophecies in verses 11 and 12 are connected with the 1260-day/year prophecy of Daniel 7 because of the reference to the time and times and a half in verse 7 of chapter 12, which is the only reference or marker point to find their historical application. We go by historical interpretation. All right, so now we're going to go to Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. This is where the study is going to get a little deeper because we got to get this right. We can't go to 12 if we don't get 11 right. It just won't work. And that's the problem with people just taking one verse and running with it. It doesn't always work. All right, so here we go. Daniel chapter 12, 11. "And from that from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, or just the daily, an abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So we got a couple things going on here. So let's start first with the daily sacrifice before we get into the timing of it. All right? So who took away the daily sacrifice on earth? Jesus did, right? Jesus did that in the middle of the 70th week, which was also prophesied in Daniel 9:27. And when he died on the cross and the veil of the temple torn from the top down, he's the one that took away the daily sacrifice on the earth.